Hello and welcome to today's special episode, Newcastle Shaken Not Stirred. I'm Kyle Carroll.
And I'm Jack Dalton, and today we will be focusing on all things Newcastle. We look back at our history, paying specific attention to the devastating earthquake which took our city by surprise almost 30 years ago.
Although it shook Newcastle physically, our community spirit was not stirred as we rebuild our city and continue the revitalisation process as we move away from our industrial roots.
Although our background includes the dominance of BHP, Newcastle has always been an exciting place to be.
Let's have a look at our incredible past and that disastrous day where a 5.6 magnitude earthquake hit Newcastle on the 28th of December 1989.
You all know Newcastle. It's that city just 2.5 hours from Sydney by car or by train. Even faster by plane.
Newcastle's quite a place.
A place to face the future.
Ross, get the car, bring it down, mate.
Well, this is Beaumont Street, Hamilton, just minutes after the blast or the explosion or the earthquake, and it looks as though a bomb has hit. Bombs have hit all along here. It's like a war scene.
At this stage, there's a whole area of the Hunter Valley has been blacked out.
It was the first fatal earthquake ever in Australia. The quake registered 5.5 on the Richter scale.
Nobody expected an earthquake to hit Newcastle. There's no history.
Norm, you've gone through so much, yet you're still smiling. How do you manage to...
That's false. False. I'm trying to avoid that, the other thing, you know, till I get out. Get away from it.
All I could see when he was there was this little boy laying on the ground with all this stuff over him. I thought he was dead. I'm still trying to forget it, but I can't do that.
The trouble is you don't know whether you're going to be saved or not until you see the light where they're coming in, because everything was piled up on top of you, everything was black.
First thought was to duck for cover, and because again you talk about 1 or 2 seconds, I suppose, and then of course this terrible fear of well, there's concrete coming down as well, you know, and bricks falling away and so forth. And I thought, well, this could well be it. I thought I might, you know, that my number was up.
You know, Kyle, it's incredible to see this sort of footage. Like, I've lived here my whole life and I've never seen anything like that. It's just, I can't imagine what it would be like to be in that sort of situation.
Yeah, I know, as you mentioned, in our lifetimes, all we've seen is that first vision that we saw, that beautiful beachside town that we all know and think Newcastle is today, how different it was in 1989.
To find out what caused this earthquake, we turned to David Battaglia, a lecturer here at the University of Newcastle and a structural geologist. Here's what he had to say.
It has been proposed that the exploration of coal in the Hunter Valley, all the mine that we have up the valley, are the cause of this earthquake. It has been refuted by a number of professionals for the simple reason that the coal is extracted from the ground at very, very shallow depth. Right? The coal is a horizontal layer and we just remove it from the ground where we found it, so the mine doesn't go deeper than about 1 kilometer. But that earthquake, that rupture, that slip was a rupture at over 10 kilometers. So it was too deep for the stress change caused by mining to affect that area, and this is clearly an earthquake caused by a larger process, the evolution of the coastline of Australia, and a completely natural earthquake.
As many believe, there were so many theories out there that our industrial background and mining was the blame for the earthquake.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people did think that the mines were the cause of that earthquake, and probably my grandpa included, who was actually asleep out at Belmont at the time of the earthquake. He woke up to the whole house shaking, and he ran outside. The moment he got there, though, it just stopped. It was completely still. And so he looks around and he goes, I must have been dreaming. So he goes back inside and goes back to sleep. And I'm sure that was sort of echoed around Newcastle, people not really realising what had happened.
Yeah, well, the earthquake only lasted 6 seconds in itself. So like you said, there'd be so many people who didn't know what was happening. But then we have residents who did in fact see the worst of it. And we have some first-hand accounts who wanted to share their stories with us, including this lady who was at Charlestown Square when the earthquake struck.
We went in there and we were having a beautiful morning shopping and we had coffee and just wandering around. And then all of a sudden there was a big bang. All the windows shattered and the glass rained down like a curtain and splattered us with glass. We didn't know what was going on. And the lights went out and it was dark. Someone started to scream, there's been an explosion at the BHP. My niece ran off and the building was in darkness, so we had to find her. And the building was shaking and she was terrified. When we found her, we stayed together and we went outside. And that's when someone said the car park had partially collapsed and there was a few cars trapped in there. People were running around asking each other if they knew what had happened, and we found one lady who'd bought a transistor radio and she turned it on and we all gathered around her. We heard on the news that Newcastle had been hit by a terrible earthquake.
I'd gone and visited the dentist for the first time in a long time in Hunter Street, and I was in NIB in Hunter Street, and all of a sudden you struggled to stand up and the ceiling started to come down, so we all raced outside thinking that a gas main or something had burst in Hunter Street, and all you heard was windows breaking in sequence all the way down Hunter Street. So then obviously the power and everything else shut down, so we had to leave, and walking back to my car I ran into a few people I knew, and they'd been walking down the mall and they said it was like surfing pavers. The pavers had gone up and down like a wave. So, you know, no one knew what happened. So we got in the car and started to come home and couldn't get down King Street because it was blocked off because of obviously what happened to the Workers' Club. And it wasn't until the radios come back online that they said we'd had an earthquake. So
Remembering, Jack, that was only in 1989, so not that long ago. Can you believe how far we've come as a city, especially with the ongoing revitalisation?
Yeah, man, it's come so far, hasn't it? It's just, I mean, not even just in terms of rebuilding the places that were damaged, but also in terms of revitalising the city as a whole. In this next segment, we look at where Newcastle is now in its timeline, contrasting the old to the new as we move forwards with a new perceived image.
So here we've got the RSL, which the first place we want to look at, and it's absolute chaos on the left-hand side here, and they've actually lost a lot of their history, Jack.
Yeah, lots of memorabilia was lost when the building came down. They were able to salvage a bit though. The bugle from the Boer War is one of those pieces which they now still have in the new premises. So.
Moving on, we've got the Workers' Club, which probably was the worst struck place, where 9 people tragically lost their lives, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've heard some reports from people who were at the scene on that day. It sounds like an absolute war zone, people running and screaming as the place was coming down.
A well-known paramedic, Alan Playford, said it was a maze of steel rods, concrete and poking machines with people just screaming for help.
The next worst place hit after the Workers' Club would have been Beaumont Street, particularly the Kent, which you can see here with the whole front face being demolished.
Could you imagine how much worse it could have been if that veranda was in place over here in this image? Back in the day, how many more injuries or lives could have been lost? Which brings us to our next image of the hospital, where there was already enough injuries that they were overcrowded and put onto the streets.
Yeah, there was actually about 160 people injured from the earthquake. And I mean, there was 300,000 people affected total, but 1,000 people were made homeless.
That's tragic news, but we've come a long way since then, Jack. And now it's time to hit the streets in order to hear what the folk of Newcastle think about the revitalisation process.
and I was driving my car in New Lambton. Thought the car had a flat tyre and got out, and there was nothing wrong with the tyres, but there'd certainly been a big shake of the ground and like an explosion.
It took some lives, a lot of people were injured, and it was just devastating for Newcastle and the city centre especially, and people who had their homes affected.
It was a massive disruption to the city. The city was shut. People died, which was very sad at the Workers Club. A lot of damage Hamilton, the Hunter area, Hunter Street here.
The Workers Club in Hunter Street was really severely damaged, and there were 12 or 13 fatalities there. That was really sad. And there's a lot of damage to a lot of buildings in Newcastle, and a lot of damage to a lot of homes as well.
I don't use the tram at all, and I don't mind it. Like, it took a while to get put in, but if it's helping people in this area, eventually it'll pay back what it costs to probably build it.
Seems to have, kind of sort of also ruined like the train network as well.
We think it'll open up Hunter Street to more retail and more cafes and people coming in. I think there's about 2,000 units, apartments to be finished in Newcastle West, right near the interchange within the next 2 to 3 years. So once that's finished, I think it'll be used a lot more and people will be up and down Hunter Street quite a lot.
It is a good thing for the city. It indicates a lot of change in town.
I think it's a great thing. Anytime we can get people out of their cars and using public transport's got to be a good thing.
I think the tram's a really good thing for Newcastle. It's been a wonderful thing to regenerate the city.
I've been away, so it's been a while since I've seen the change, but since I've been away there's been so much development. Newcastle's really becoming alive.
Newcastle was pretty average when that came in, and I think even though it's been slow, it's been fantastic for the city, and without it we'd be still pretty average and full of just stock good yards across the road, very underutilised harbour foreshore.
It means there's more variety for Novocastrians, but also it offers more for people that want to come and see our beautiful city. So yeah, I think it's great. Anytime we can put more things into Newcastle, obviously the university has moved in with their new space, so I think it's a great thing.
The city is going to go along the same way as Sydney and Melbourne, with very public transport focus.
More renewable sources like energy, that sort of stuff. Something that'll make it a city for the future and not for now.
I would love to see the inner city of Newcastle become more like Melbourne's laneways.
Any time that there's a venue that can facilitate live music is a good thing, I think. Particularly supporting our local artists as well. It's so hard to get a break in the music industry these days.
I'd like lots of open spaces. I think there's plenty of apartments and plenty of businesses and restaurants and cafes. But, lots of open spaces would be really good for the greater community to share the harbour and the beaches.
Yeah, and it's great to hear the differing opinions of different Novocastrians, Jack, especially the tram line, which personally I really enjoy.
Yeah, I actually have a bit of a different opinion. I think that it's kind of unnecessary. They already had the train line going all the way into the centre of the city. It seems like a little bit of a step backwards to take that out and then put something back in.
Yeah, but I think it's all about moving away from our industrial background and completely revitalising the city and making a completely new image, which I think they've successfully done.
I will grant you that. It does give the city a bit of a different sort of feel to when it had the train. It feels a much more modern city.
Yeah, and I definitely think Newcastle is going to become a pretty big tourist destination in the future with that beautiful beachside and then the transportation up and down Hunter Street there. The future's looking good.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Newcastle, Shaken Not Stirred.
Looking back to only 30 years ago, it's crazy to think how far we've come, Jack, don't you reckon?
I absolutely do, and I can't wait to see where it goes in the future. I'm Jack Dalton.
And I'm Kyle Carroll. We will see you next time on Newcastle, Tomorrow Never Dies.